The prince stood before the map representing the principality's up-to-date political situation. He silently thanked his good fortune that nothing had changed in favor of Duke Draymor's faction despite that his own forces were also unchanged. With the territories of House Astor more or less held at bay and locked in a stalemate, he couldn't expect any help to come from there anytime soon. The same could be said for House Winfield, but he was certain that they were fighting against the Draymor forces or had consolidated, gathering their strength and likely trying to recall whatever loyalists they could reach. As was the right of the great houses and many minor houses, most of them were neutral on the conflict. Loyalty was a shifting thing, and to most people a matter of convenience and opportunity. The prince wanted to sigh and rub his temples in exasperation as his mind ran through a plethora of diplomatic options, petty grievances between houses, false claims of loyalty, opportunistic deals made in the shadows, traitors and turncoats on both sides waiting to strike, and the countless other details that eluded him due to miscommunication, distance, and veiled intentions of those waiting to gain from the conflict that his uncle had created. Of the great 10 Astorian Royal Navy fleets, the 3rd, the 6th, the 9th, and about 2/3 of the 10th had sided with Duke Draymor. The 3rd came as an unforeseen development, being the smallest, weakest, and least honored fleet of them all. The 6th was of no surprise, since more of their elements came from Draymor territory. The 9th and the 10th were, again, not a surprise given their proximity to Draymor space. The fact that a 1/3 of the 10th Fleet had decided to remain loyal was a surprise, and now they were lost somewhere, a ragtag remnant most likely hiding from Draymor forces. On his side, though, things were much darker. The 1st, the 2nd, the 4th, the 7th, and the 8th fleets remained loyal to House Astor, but only the 2nd and 8th fleets remained intact. The 1st, 4th, and 7th fleets were, thanks to the efforts of Admiral Damien, able to disengage a great portion of their forces into Winfield territory before Draymor forces crippled more of their vessels. It was also thanks to him that the Exalted Virtue, one of the most modern battlecruisers part of the 1st Fleet, had been saved to begin with, and now served as his personal flagship. He didn't know what happened to the remnants of those fleets after escaping, but he knew they were fighting alongside the Winfields. The 2nd and 8th fleets were scattered across Valto, Finnegan, and Kalen territories, likely fighting in small-scale skirmishes against Draymor forces, keeping them pinned there for the time being. His only solace was that, if his speculation was correct, at least half of the 2nd would be waiting for his arrival at Macha. Only the 5th Fleet remained entirely neutral, which surprised him nothing given who its fleet admiral was, and he doubted that the 5th would choose a side until a clear winner manifested itself. That suited him well. The 5th was in charge of stopping any incursions that the Arabian Commonwealth could launch into Principality space. The fleets are one thing, but each house is entitled to own their private ships if they can afford them, the prince muttered to himself, as yet another source for his mounting headache was added to the raging thunderstorm that was his mind. And some have small fleets or powerful ships at their disposal. That goes without taking into account civilian-class ships, stations, satellites. I wish Alexander was here. I hate large-scale logistics. It is not your forte, brother dearest, but do not besmirch your efforts. Alexander may be capable of organizing and micromanaging anything he's in charge of, but he's too close-minded and can hardly see the bigger picture. You, on the other hand, can, Clara replied, before taking a sip out of her drink, humming pleasingly at the sweetness of it. I pray that both he and Giovanni are safe, and that our remaining siblings are being treated fairly. A traitor he may be, but Uncle Cornelius is an honorable man. He wouldn't stoop so low as to hurt them willingly. Let us hope that his honor is not as brittle as his loyalty, the prince replied. That, too, is my hope, brother dearest, Clara said and stared at the map, her eyes focusing on the edges that pointed at their 5 closest neighbors. To the northwest, the Yakanti hierarchy. To the west, the Drazan collective. To the southeast, the Arabian Commonwealth. To the northeast, and thankfully the farthest of them, the Zarma Jalar Katiloalka Compact, or Zarma Compact since the name was a mouthful, a collection of different species of aliens that were always in conflict with their neighboring rivals, the Tilgor Alliance. Finally, to the north, the Albion Federation could be found, and beyond them, the Imperium, the Qin Shu Commonality, the Society of Tabacs, and many more. But diplomatic relations with other human nations, excluding the Arabian Commonwealth, were limited but friendly. The only reason they kept even that much contact was due to the required yearly transmissions and updates that they shared as part of the Pax Humanitas, a safeguard that united all human nations in a way and prevented them from completely ignoring each other. Technically speaking, they had a sixth neighbor, yet another human nation, but they were so far removed that they were a non-factor. And just like the Arabian Commonwealth, the isolationist Diviners were not part of the Pax Humanitas. While not much was known about them, they were to the Principality what the Principality was to the vast majority of the other human nations in terms of power and technological advancement. Her eyes narrowed as she discarded dangers and focused on the three main threats that could take advantage of the chaos spreading across the Principality. "We will surely see an increase in Drazan raiders," she said with disgust. "The Akanti hierarchy might see a chance to strike at us. I hope they stay their hand or that they are far too occupied dealing with their internal struggles for them to take interest in our moment of weakness." The prince nodded. "Which leaves the Arabian Commonwealth as our ever-constant, persistent external threat. The Fifth Fleet has always been more independent than the rest and focused on their duty. I would like to gain Timon's support, but I'd rather have him stay put. The last thing we need is the Arabians thinking they have an easy way into the Principality." Clara giggled at that. "You've never told me the reason for your dislike of Fleet Admiral Timon Arnav. It began so suddenly, too. What changed, brother dearest?" "I detest the man, but I can't move against him," the prince replied, eyes narrowing. "He's a narcissist and an egomaniac. Were it not for his many accolades and victories over Arabian pirates and his tactical genius, I would have ordered him beheaded as my first official order as prince," the blond man replied, sneering. "He does not tolerate failure, and any offense, real or imagined, against him is dealt with swiftly and with deathly force." Clara was taken aback at her brother's reveal. She had thought it was something petty or some minor incident, not something so grave. "Brother dearest, why was I not aware of his demeanor?" "I was not aware of it until father passed away and I inherited the throne," he replied. "It is no secret that many nobles abuse their power, but some are much, much worse than others, and their criminal acts must be hidden within the data to protect their reputation or standing within both their respective houses and the military if they have a career in it." She was aware of that fact, of course. Commoners were so easy to abuse, and almost every time a noble would come unscathed from their actions. That her brother was willing to reveal that much without going into further details spoke volumes of the depravity of the famous, glory-hungry, and renowned Timon Arnav. "I was going to suggest reaching out to him at some point, but given this new information, I'd rather keep him where he is. No doubt Uncle Cornelius has thought the same." The prince nodded. "Too egregious to rely upon, too useful to eliminate." "Let's move past that unsavory topic, brother dearest. Our focus must be set on the now for the moment," Clara said. "Has Frederick revealed anything of value?" "Some names, all of them arrested or disposed of already. The QEC was disabled by some unknown means shortly after his capture. But we already know that the matching device was likely in possession of the now Fleet Admiral Cornelius Tigan. I doubt Fleet Admiral Carlos Valto yet lives. Damien will surely mourn the loss of his cousin." The prince paused for a moment. "Another possibility is that someone within House Caiston had possession of it. Probably Andrew or Tamarin Caiston." His expression hardened. "Frederick has proven to be remarkably resilient to interrogation. How he was able to conspire with Draymore loyalists still eludes us for the time being." The princess hummed deeply before speaking. "While I do not condone torture as a method for information extraction, perhaps it could, as Cynthia would describe, soften him up," Clara proposed, her expression darkening with grim resolve. "I'm certain Juliana would enjoy the chance to make that damnable traitor suffer within reason." The prince closed his eyes for a moment, then stared at his sister. "I've considered it, but I will not condone such methods just yet. House Anderson is officially neutral. I would not wish to push them to the Draymore's side. Frederick is one of their potential heirs and beloved within his house. Fair, Clara replied, before taking another sip from her drink. I wonder how much support he'll retain once his treachery is known. The prince remained silent for a few seconds before continuing. The traitor threat has been culled. There will be a few remaining ones that will elude capture, but they will pose no more threat without their leader. Let it be so, brother dearest, Clara replied. Speaking of traitors and potential threats, why have you placed 20 Royal Marines under my command? That's nearly half of our remaining Royal Marines. I do not wish for you to remain unprotected. I have Cynthia at my side. At least take Milcades with you, brother dearest. The prince turned to face Clara fully and slowly walked over to her. Silently, he gently took hold of her right hand and caressed it while looking into her violet eyes with a soft smile on his face. You stand above our siblings as my most beloved sister, Clara. I love you, sister dearest, he said, before gently inviting her to stand up. Once she did, he gave her a hug which she reciprocated. I want you to be as safe as possible. Is it not my duty as your older brother to see to your well-being? Clara ended the hug a few seconds later, and her lips were curled into a soft, tender smile. You're too caring, brother dearest. As if you're one to give me a lecture regarding caring for others, Clara, the prince retorted, making her sister blush slightly in embarrassment. Letting go of her, he turned his gaze to the map. There is much to do, and I want to keep you as safe as possible. I wish I could send you away into a remote part of the principality where this conflict could not reach. Alas, I can't. Allow me to give you as much protection as I can provide. As her blush vanished, Clara let out a defeated sigh. Very well, brother dearest. If it is your desire and command, then I won't object any further. Regardless, are you certain you want to depart from Redford? We barely have enough pilots to fill 2 wedges, half of our current fighter capacity. He'd be of more use to you. You may be correct, Clara, but I need my other commanders more for what's to come. Vivian and Lukacs have handpicked one of their best subordinates to act as your logistical and intelligence experts for the time being. Milcades will have to act as your chief of security and marine commander. I adore Cynthia, but she can't be trusted to command anything larger than a strike force, he said with some mirth in his voice. Clara smiled too, when her brother picked fun at their dear friend's expense. And Redford shall be the overall commander of my ship while I remain as captain in name only. Splendid. You, my dearest sister, will deal with everything else and be in charge of them all. I certainly hope you are ready for the role, the prince joked. Speaking of your ship, why, in Julius's name, did you name it Noirnavio? Oh? Clara's expression turned sly and foxy. Brother dearest, I merely agreed to the name. Why, I wouldn't have been able to come up with a name for such an outstanding ship so quickly, although I approve of the naming convention. Oh no, it was not I who gave the ship its new name. That honor lies within our newly elevated knight banneret. The prince let out a long, profound sigh. You had every intention of ennobling him from the moment he achieved victory over ZTK 990, didn't you? Clara smirked. I had some reservations despite his display. What convinced me was his instrumental role in the battle. It was further cemented during a rather private moment we shared, and that I nor Cynthia will disclose, brother dearest. The prince raised an eyebrow. Does he even know what renaming a captured prized vessel entails? Why would he? I'm certain that it'll be a rather splendid surprise when he finds that out, Clara replied, still smirking. Regardless of my intent, the Noirnavio is my ship. None shall object. The prince shook his head a couple of times before replying. On that, Clara, you're correct. Oh, I nearly forgot. The Drazen captain finally broke. Milcades was not gentle, but our initial suspicions were confirmed. These raiders, and several other fleets, are striking across the nearest incursion points and bordering systems. This fleet detected our warp jump signatures, and a stealth probe sent ahead provided all the information they needed. The Drazen took a gamble, and fortunately for us, they lost. Clara was relieved to hear that the Castons, and by extension the Draymore forces, had not pushed the Drazen against them themselves. But she knew her brother well, and the tone he used ushered no respite. Instead, there was a cold feel to it. She quickly analyzed her brother's words once again and noticed the information that didn't match. How was it possible for several Drazen raiding fleets to strike across the Principality when the conflict had just started? The travel time alone from their usual cattle grounds outside Principality space would take them at least a month, without counting whatever meager forces were already inside the Principality launching their usual strikes. She frowned deeply. If they were not ushered by the traitors, then who did? Most likely whoever manufactured the black ships. They tipped off the Drazen raiders before the coup began, giving them enough time to travel in force and begin their assaults right when we were in complete disarray. Clara, the number of lives that will be lost thanks to them will be staggering. Without the fleets in their usual patrol routes and quick response stations, only in-system forces and house vessels will be left to defend those vulnerable territories. And we're powerless to send aid of any sort, Clara concluded bitterly. Many will blame House Astor for those assaults, and I'm certain many lesser and minor houses will be seduced by the Draymore traitors if they can defend their territories from Drazen incursions. It will make you look weak and incompetent. For the moment, yes, the prince agreed. Once we arrive at Macha, we will rebuild our strength and bring the fight to the traitors. This cannot devolve into a civil war. I won't let it, he said decidedly. And I shall do everything within my power to help you, brother dearest, Clara said reassuringly. I will miss you dearly, Clara. I will miss Redford and Cynthia, too, he chuckled. I will even miss Wyatt. I finally found a player that stands at my lackluster level, and I have to see him go. Promise me you that will stay safe once you depart? I promise nothing of the sort, brother dearest. I shall, however, make every effort to not endanger my life needlessly, Clara stated with a soft but firm smile. The siblings stared at each other for several seconds, then shared a final tight but short-lived hug before the princess left the room, leaving her brother alone with his thoughts. Again! Cynthia commanded firmly as she watched over the beaten, broken, panting, sweating mass of flesh that was once a man named Wyatt Staples. The pilot was on the ground, clutching his stomach as he panted raggedly on the ground. Mercy, please, Wyatt breathed out, managing not to choke on his words as he tried to retain a measure of dignity by rolling to the side, flipping himself over to lay on his back. A vast improvement from his previous fetal position as far as he was concerned. This woman is trying to kill me, he thought in a panic as his gaze focused on a pristine and serious Cynthia Winfield wearing her usual red armor. A week had passed since their departure from Woodshaft, and, good to his word, the jump point Uriel Hoax provided kept them away from any possible Caiston, Tigan, or Third Fleet forces. The Nornavio, with Commander Redford sitting at the captain's chair, served as the fleet's primary scout ship, and it was a marvel to see her in action. He had not given it much thought after his short-lived command of the wonderful ship, but it truly was a magnificent vessel. The AI that was destroyed during the capture was replaced, restoring the Nornavio's navigational and communicational capabilities. The crew of the ship was mostly made out of Woodshaft recruits, except for key leading roles such as Chief of Engineering, Master Technician, chefs, and logistical and intelligence experts. There were hand-picked Marines by Commander Juliana herself and plentiful auxilia forces, not to mention the mercenaries that Clara hired, general crew members, and the Akantes, which, funnily enough, all of them were technicians and mechanics. Jincho in particular was a rather vocal fellow at the best of times, but he was earnest in his craft, and he had to admit the Akante was the best damn technician he had ever seen. He was still not done with the fighter he'd wrecked, but it was already looking as good as any of the other Raptor fighters in the hangar. He had even seen Galt Tirome and a few of the other nobles he vouched for, and while he had yet to talk with the red-haired man, Cynthia told him that he and the rest of the bridge personnel had so far been instrumental in teaching others how to operate the Nornavio correctly and how to access the ship's systems for maintenance and more. Surprisingly, no one seemed to mind their presence, and Jincho, above all, took in the knowledge and was as enraptured as he was with the deadly black ship. During that week, no major incidents had been produced. The Woodshaft recruits recognized him, and some even were brave enough to praise his suicidal heroics. It felt odd receiving praise from total strangers, but he welcomed it nonetheless. The nobles transferred from the prince's fleet were another story, though. They mostly kept their distance, but he could feel the eyes of envy and disdain sent his way. He didn't show it, of course, but damn it all, it felt good to not be ordered around by his betters for once. Of course, some nobles complained that their quarters were too small, others were outraged that the mess hall was not segregated, and a few even filed formal complaints that the commoner dregs were far too numerous and thus sullied such a beautiful ship. There were only 1,021 crew members aboard the Noir Navio, and less than 20% of them were nobles. The ship still needed more personnel and effective elements to be properly fully staffed. For starters, it had no formal army personnel, and the auxilia forces and the mercenaries were to act as a replacement. There were also no ROSFs, no mechanized personnel except for the technicians, engineers, and mechanics, and only a handful of pilots handpicked by Commander Redford himself. Among them, the members of Epsilon Squadron, who he had interacted with only briefly during the past week, thanking them for speaking on his behalf during the trial. Cynthia and Redford, though, quelled any complaints, reminding everyone that the Noir Navio was a captured vessel not made in the Principality, and that they would have to adapt to it, or they would face charges for insubordination. That soundly did the trick to shut them up, and now that he thought about it, he hadn't talked to Commander Redford or Clara since they left Woodshaft. Cynthia had taken command of him and made him train relentlessly, barely giving him any time that he could spend on doing anything else but eat, shower, and sleep. To call her a ruthless teacher was a grave understatement. "I'm sure I've got strained muscles and bruises in places I didn't know I had before," he complained silently, his fatigue mounting, but thanks to his implants, he could still keep going at the demented pace Cynthia Winfield was putting him through. Any moment to catch his breath was welcomed, and he made sure to stretch it as much as possible. "Again," Cynthia repeated, this time more firmly. Wordlessly, Wyatt groaned and slowly rose to his feet. First by rolling over again, then by going on all fours, and finally by shakily standing up. The gym area itself was quite ample, and none dared to linger for more than a few seconds on the spectacle that was him kissing the floor over and over again. Cracking his neck with a satisfying pop, he moved his shoulders before adopting a defensive posture. Tentatively, he rushed at Cynthia, throwing a jab that she eluded with ease. Immediately, he used his left heel as a pivot to shift to his right, before throwing a second jab that was, again, easily dodged. Using his momentum, he jumped back and performed a roundhouse kick that Cynthia had painfully taught him on the second day of their reinstated training torture routine. The blue-haired woman caught his foot and with a swift motion twisted it, making him lose his balance. She was about to grapple him when she saw the pilot use the moment to his advantage. Instead of falling, he twisted his body so that his palms hit the ground first. Then, he used his free left foot to deliver a kick to her stomach. Wyatt felt a rush of dread wash over him when Cynthia merely blocked his kick with a raised knee. Before he knew it, he was in the air as the room began to spin all around him. Then he hit the floor and was followed by a strong and lightning-fast three-hit combo delivered to his stomach. 3 swift punches, and the air left his lungs again, leaving him panting on the ground, writhing in pain. Again. That was impressive, Wyatt. You've improved significantly since our first training session. At this rate, we can leave the amateur techniques behind in less than a week, and I can start teaching you the basics of training," Cynthia said without a hint of sassiness, humor, or sarcasm in her voice. "Amateur techniques? Basics of training? This wasn't actual training? Then what the hell have I endured so far? What does this crazy woman mean? She's trying to kill me. Father, I regret it now. I want to join the diplomatic corps. I'll work my entire life at the wood mill. Weskull, sign me up for Clixal hunting. Anything has to be better than this torture," Wyatt cried out as he panted on the ground, his eyes unfocused as he began to ponder his life choices seriously. Before Cynthia could demand another round, a voice rang inside their minds at the same time. "Cynthia, Wyatt, suspend your training session for now. I require Wyatt's presence at once in my chambers. I won't take much of your time," Redford's voice said, and then the connection ended. Despite the pain and his ragged breathing, Wyatt managed to smile in utter relief after hearing the command. His eyes landed on Cynthia and saw her posture relax. She walked up to him and offered a hand. He took it, and he was suddenly pulled up on his shaky feet. "You heard him, Wyatt. Go take a bath and don your uniform. We'll continue tomorrow." "Oh, of course. Thank you, Cynthia," he said through bruised ribs. Cynthia's expression softened slightly and a weak smile showed on her lips. "You're no prodigy, but you'll do." Then she let go of his hand and walked away, leaving him behind. Wyatt watched her back and blinked in confusion. What's that supposed to mean? He mumbled to himself before heading to the showers. After a quick but refreshing bath, he put on his uniform and saw himself in the mirror. He mockingly saluted his reflection before leaving to meet with his commanding officer. When he arrived at Redford's quarters, he was about to tell the AI that he was there when the door opened by itself. He entered the room and the door closed behind him. The commander's room wasn't that large, about twice as big as his old quarters back in the Exalted Virtue, a luxury by his standards, but he didn't know if Redford found the space claustrophobic. Stopping before his desk, he saluted respectfully. "Lieutenant Wyatt reporting, sir." "I see that Cynthia shows you no mercy," Redford replied with a knowing smirk. "She's quite the instructor." Wyatt opted for the more diplomatic answer as his muscles ached at the mention of the blue-haired woman. "Would you believe me if I say that Cynthia is much more merciful than Juliana?" Redford chuckled once before signaling Wyatt to take a seat. "Wyatt, now that you are a knight banneret and a noble, I can no longer overlook your lack of knowledge regarding officer training. Henceforth, I shall directly instruct you on what you need to know: rules, etiquette, and proper conduct." "I understand, sir. Thank you, Commander," Wyatt replied, his heart beating fast and suddenly feeling queasy. "Officer, I'm actually going to have to be an officer now. I'm going to be terrible at it. I just know it. How can I compare to a noble trained to be an officer? As your first official role, you are now my second in command regarding our fighter forces. Including you, we only have 40 pilots. The pilots I picked were not the best of the best, but rather the least troublesome given our peculiar circumstances," he explained, and passed the flabbergasted pilot a datapad. "Epsilon Squadron is no more. You shall command a new squadron, our most veteran and accomplished squadron aboard the Noir Navio. It may not be much, but Princess Clara deserves our best efforts and recognition of her forces." Redford clarified and stroked his chin for a moment before continuing. "This datapad contains all the information available on our current pilots. You may select whichever 4 you want to be part of your squadron. Furthermore, you can, if you want, showcase your status as an ace and the veterinary insignias on your chosen fighter. And as a knight banneret, you may also display your heraldic shield. However, I advise that you don't. It could mark you as a potential target to enemy forces." Redford's expression was hard to read, but there was regret, exasperation, and sadness on his features for a few moments. "Too many lives have been lost because of that display of needless hubris," he sighed, and his serious expression returned. "Is that understood, Lieutenant?" Wyatt looked at the datapad, then at Redford, blinked twice, and took the datapad. "Understood, sir. I just have one question." "Yes?" Redford pressed. "What will be the name of my new squadron?" he asked, feeling uneasy yet oddly excited at the same time. In the span of 2 minutes, he had been placed right under Commander Redford, leading their limited and meager fighter forces, but it was so much more than he could have ever imagined. Not only that, but he got to choose his squad mates, too. Not even in his wildest fantasies something like that ever crossed his mind, which only made his heart race faster when he saw Redford give him a knowing look. "Whatever you want. Just, please, think of a better name than Nornavio." Wyatt saluted. "I will try, Commander, and I think I know how to," he thought a second later.